aggression, because I'm not going to have simple answers here for you. What I'm really going to try to present is a kind of frame for trying to think about aggression when you see it in your children or if you're working with patients, sort of how to think about it, and to try to give you some picture of a developmental progression of sort of what kinds of things are causing aggression, let's say, in the first year of life, as the child moves into toddlerhood, as the child moves into the school years. So I'm going to try to flesh out, and I guess there are a couple of things I want to stress at the very beginning, that one really can't give an easy answer about a child, because what's going to work well with one child is not going to work well with another child. And the reason for this, I would say, kind of a core idea, is that when we look at research and try to predict outcome by looking at the child and the child's temperament, we fail terribly. So if we're looking at something like low thresholds of reactivity, very sensitive child, child with an externalizing kind of temperament, a very highly intense child, and we think we can predict the outcome, doesn't work. If we try to evaluate the parenting or the environment, look at the attunement of the parents, the responsiveness of the parents, how consistent they are, we're going to fail. Because the essence of being able to predict seems to be the concrete experience of the child. So it depends, how does this particular child with this particular temperament fit together with this particular parenting? And that is going to allow you to see, when they come together, does this parenting seem to bring this child to their best level of functioning? So you could have a very active baby, very strong-willed, very powerful, and you could have a very active parent who's very lively, vivacious, and it just doesn't fit so well together. An extreme example of how you could have the same outcome from very different ways is looking at autism. You could have a child who, because of constitutional problems, is so poorly wired that they cannot process social stimuli. Or you could have a psychotic mother who can't respond to a normal baby. In both cases, the concrete experience is that this baby doesn't have a mother. So I think trying to understand, it's not, you can't just read off, well, this is what you should do with your baby. Another thing to think about is sort of the complexity of aggression, and to think of it on a continuum. Because on one side of the continuum, you have assertiveness, the ability to defend oneself, that aggression is a very positive thing. On the other extreme, you have hostile, destructive aggression with the intent to hurt. So we can't just talk about aggression. We have to try to understand what leads to the development of hostile aggression, and not any aggression is bad, certainly. In terms of the way different people have looked at aggression from a theoretical point of view, there are some very different contrasting views, starting with Freud and Klein, who really saw sort of the death instinct or the destructive inborn tendencies. On the other extreme is the idea that there is only innate assertiveness, and it's a reaction to frustration. In other words, under the influence of frustration, that this will turn to destructive aggression. And then there are a lot of views in between, sort of a little bit more the way I was describing. How do the certain unfolding of aggressive manifestations get handled by the environment? So I'm going to go through some ideas about the natural unfolding of aggression, what you see in the first year. And I would also emphasize so much, and this is part of the crew, that Winnicott said there's no such thing as a baby without a mother. So the whole idea of the social context and a family or the mothering one can be not biologically, birth child, certainly could be gay couples. There is certainly no limit on what that family might be. But crucially importance is how the parenting people view the aggressive manifestations of their child. So a child in the first year of life who bites the mother's breast, one mother might think, look at my strong baby. And another mother might say, I have a monster, I don't know what to do with this baby. So it's very crucially important, how these manifestations are viewed. A child I treated over a long period of time, one of the most powerful forces that was the hardest to work with was how much both parents had sort of selected the child as a really problematic sibling who they each saw as a monster. And so this child really, in terms of being able to feel he could understand and feel good about himself, he was up against enormous odds. So it's extremely important in working with children, certainly, that you include the crew, that you really get to know what is this home environment like. You really get to know the people, and you really have a chance to work with them. I feel that's very important. Now, one of the earliest ways in the very first year of life that a child starts learning about his emotions is something that's been called the biosocial feedback. And this has to do with how the mothering person and the baby sort of interact so the child can learn about emotions. And it's a very natural thing usually that parents are able to do. That let's say your child is crying. What a parent sort of naturally does is kind of exaggerate to the child the cry. So if the child's crying a little, the parent might go, wah, wah. And it's a way of showing the child, this is what you're feeling. This is what it looks like. But then a crucial piece following that is the parent doesn't start crying more. The parent then sort of in some playful way or soothing way lets the child know that what their emotion is not frightening to them, and that they are going to do what they can to help that child feel better. So this kind of feedback is very different than if a child is crying angrily and a parent gets furious. So you can see those early steps are very crucial in a child being able to learn about what they feel and that help will come. That this is a crucial kind of protective presence, this mothering person who is not going to give up, who basically is saying, if something is wrong, I'm going to do what I can to help you. This is so key to feelings of vulnerability and helplessness, because a child then has a feeling, I'm not alone with this. Someone out there is going to try to make this better. So, what are some of the manifestations? As early as of about 8 weeks to 16 weeks of age, what you see is what's been called the assertion of the infantile self on the environment. That this is neither hostile nor destructive, but a child has a certain goal. And one of the earliest things that gives a child a feeling of self-esteem and good feeling is to have an effect on the environment. That if they do something, something happens. And this is enormously powerful. So when they're trying to make something happen, if there's an obstacle and they're going to get restrained, that is going to cause a lot of unpleasure. I won't even call it anger, call it distress. It's very short-lived. As soon as you remove that restraint, the anger goes away. So it's not something that's held on to, but this is really a very important step and a very positive experience of the child trying out and trying to learn about the environment. We also see, and you need aggressive energy for this, for sort of trying to cope with things that are unpleasant. Very early on, babies have ways of coping. If there's something they don't like, they can close their eyes. You know, one of the earliest defenses leading to a later, what we call denial, and unfortunately many people still use this defense. When there's real problem in a mother-child interaction, a child will use perception. They will actually edit the parent out of the picture, look right through that parent as if they don't see them. And then some of the other biological defenses like fight or flight, or what's been called conservation withdrawal, which is really like a deer caught in the headlights, where the child sort of freezes, almost conserving energy for a safer time. So certainly children in the first year are able to fight against restraints. Children can hit, throw, bite, kick, scratch, snatch toys. I think there tends to be more anger when a child is actively endowed, so that push to want to be able to do something. And if it is met with a very frustrating, punitive, overly stimulating, controlling, intrusive, or unpredictable and inconsistent parent. Just to give you a flavor about aggression, institutional babies that have been studied, you don't see aggression. Actually, you see very little in the way of that assertive push. That sucking is never vigorous. There's a failure of activation in development. It's very low. And that you only get something like rocking or headbanging when there's been a tie to a nurse. If there's been a lot of variation in the nursing and there is no tie, the baby just gives up. It's really, you need that aggressive force to develop, to grow, to separate. So if such a baby stays in that institution, what you really see is failure to thrive and apathy. If that child is taken into a loving home, you might see headbanging initially, which is actually an aliveness, and that subsides after an attachment is made. So what you see in the most disturbed situations is that you don't even see withdrawal. You see undrawal, like there's no attachment, so there's no withdrawing. There's no interest. It's sort of not devaluing, unvalued. It's like the object world is dead and the self is dead. So that's not this vigorous outward destructive aggression. So a crucial thing, this is something that Winnicott talks about, is the mother's capacity to really survive aggression. And what that really means is to not be changed by it. A parent who's facing an aggressive infant who gets angry back and then, sort of withdraws, that mother didn't survive. She has changed. She has been changed by the baby. So this capacity to survive and to really be responsive is crucial. Like, there's an experiment that's done at about 3 or 4 months where a mother is told to play with her baby, and then she's told just to have a still face. Well, babies go crazy. They are overwhelmed by this, that not getting that feedback, even for a few minutes, is really a very, very aversive situation. There's another experiment that was done when kids are about 9 months old. This is called the visual cliff experiment, where a plexiglass glass is put over a kind of rock base. And so it looks, as the baby is placed on one end of this kind of glass table, the mother is on the opposite end. And these are babies who can crawl. If the mother is on the opposite end and smiling, the baby crawls across. If the mother is on the other end and she's frowning, the baby will not go across. If the mother has a blank face, again, the baby goes crazy. They get upset, cry, get overwhelmed, roll up in a ball. Very extreme reactions. So that kind of responsiveness, babies are wired to pay attention and to see what that feedback is. And it's sort of the hallmark, really, of the attachment literature. I'm sure you're probably all familiar with that, but maybe I'll just very briefly. It's sort of a report card on the parents when the baby is about 12 months old. And the situation is that the baby is sort of in a room with the mother playing with toys, and then the mother leaves, or first a stranger comes in. These parts aren't as important. The mother leaves, and you see how the baby plays with the stranger. Then the stranger leaves, so the baby's all alone. This whole experiment's about 2 minutes. Then the mother comes back in, and it's very important how the baby greets the mother. There seems to be, from a lot of research that's been done, if the mother and child have a very open relationship where the mother has been very responsive to the baby's needs and the baby is able to sort of express the full range of emotion, the baby greets the mother very happily. If the mother has been somewhat rejecting, when the mother comes back, the baby tends to minimize emotion and sometimes avoids the mother, is very interested in playing with his toys, but really doesn't greet the mother. If the mother has been preoccupied or somewhat inconsistent, the child will greet the mother, crawl over, want to be picked up, but the mother can't seem to soothe the child. The child pushes off, and there's a lot of struggle, so the child wants to be with the mother but can't really get comfortably satisfied. If a parent has really been very frightening to the child, or the mother has really a history of trauma, the child has a kind of disorganized reaction, sort of freezes, starts to go to the mother. It's not like really contacts the mother, but really is, again, in that sort of fragmented, I don't know what to do with myself state. So crucial in this first year is the responsiveness of the parent, the sense that the child feels their needs are going to get met or responded to. And there develops a sense of trust, a beginning ability to delay. So when the child hears the mother enter the room, they'll stop crying because they sort of know mother is there and they're going to get help. Now we'll move on a bit to the second year where, no, I'm fine. I don't know if you want to interrupt me or, okay, I'll go on. The second year, okay, so a lot of the first year is spent, and I won't go into the details of it, but the child is exploring. There is a tremendous interest in crawling, moving, getting upright, sitting upright. A child who has both hands free can really explore things in a way they can't when they can't sit up by themselves. The Greenacre has called this time a love affair with the world. The child really kind of can't get enough of sort of exploring things. But by about 15 months, and this can get very confusing to parents, as walking and moving and locomotion has sort of gotten to be more old hat, the child has a renewed focus on the mother and where is she. And so parents seem very confused because they feel my child was so independent, I could leave my child, didn't seem to be much of a problem. By the second year, there's a really big change. The child is now much more focused on mother's whereabouts. And what seems to be happening, and this is gradual, it certainly isn't that the child wasn't, sort of making a special attachment to the mother and being concerned about where she was, but it's sort of in a very much more focused way. And what seems to be happening now is that the child is now much more aware of what Mahler has called psychological separateness. That the child realizes where he felt sort of the drunken pleasure in the world, he sort of wasn't so focused on, he sort of felt mother was there with him. He'd sort of refuel, look over to her, and this issue about his position in the world wasn't so clear. But at this point, he starts to realize more and more that mother can come and go, and that her capacities belong to her, not him. And so this is a sort of rude awakening. It certainly goes better when this is gradual. But sometimes it isn't so gradual, and that can be a more problematic thing. But the child often feels betrayed because the mother can't allow him his full autonomy and can't restore those old feelings of such omnipotence and power because that wasn't real. So she can't undo his more realistic perception. So he's more aware that he's relatively small and helpless in the world. And he often, one of the reactions to this is to get very controlling. It's really part of the terrible twos. It's sort of like he wants to prove, no, I must be wrong. I am powerful. I can get my mother to do this or that. But there are certain things the mother just can't fix, like his sense of aloneness, because he's more aware of their separateness. And he is aware that mother doesn't always soothe him perfectly, and that she's sometimes absent. So this issue about his power and his aloneness, really, she's been able to fix most things, but this one she can't fix. Mahler has this film of a little girl of about 18 months that sort of captures this very much. She's trying to spin this top that you have to push down and the thing turns around. And she just does not have the coordination to make this happen. So the mother's like trying to help her by push her hand. She's furious. She wants the mother's hand away, but she wants the top to go. So she's sort of caught in this dilemma, and the mother can't help her because she can't make the daughter able to do it, and there's sort of no way out. So what's very key here is really the mother's tolerance for the aggression. There's no way around this aggression. And being able to tolerate how anxious the child can get over their aggression, because the anger is big, and they're very concerned about it. They realize, since they've been angry many times, that mother's not always so happy with them being angry. They're much more aware of separateness and separation, so they can start to get afraid if they're angry, maybe it'll keep their mother away. And they don't have a realistic perception about anger and what it can do, so it can be very frightening, the effect of their anger. So at this point, I would say, and it's really not until about 15, 16 months, that you really start to see hostile aggression. Like a child at this age, this is totally normal, really wants to hurt the mother, really feels the mother is withholding and is mean, and they want to hurt her. They feel angry. And when they're feeling that angry, they can feel like all love is gone. It really takes a development to be able to integrate angry and loving feelings. You're not just able to do this right away. So when you're in the throes of anger, it can be a very frightening state. And now there's an awareness, because all these things that have been going on, the nature of these interactions, are starting to be able to be represented. The child is starting to be able to have an image of the mother. At first, it may be a very fleeting image and a very concrete image of mother feeding them, mother changing their diaper. But gradually, the representations of the mother and really the complexity of what she does gets to be not so fleeting. These interactions get to be quite regular, and they get to be represented in the child's mind. So the idea of the self, and there are different signs showing that a child is really able to represent himself, call himself by name, recognize himself in the mirror, that these representations are getting more clear. So now, in addition to having his activities interrupted, there also is a tremendous sense of jealousy and rivalry as the child starts to realize the mother has other interests, not just him or her. And that's a very upsetting thing. So the child now, you can't just fix that. There's nothing you can sort of take away the restraint and now the child's gonna not be angry. So now the child really has the ability to hold on to anger and to really hold a grudge. Like there were some observations in the nursery of a little girl, some little boy had taken a toy of hers. 2 days later, she goes over, grabs his toy. It's like she held on to that grudge until she had an opportunity that he was playing with something and she took it away. So these things, the memory is better, representations are better, things are able to be represented. So you have sort of the mental equipment now of really being able to hold a grudge. Now, in addition to all of this, this is often the time when parents start thinking about toilet training. So you have here another, and probably in some way, one of the first demands that's made on a child about controlling themselves. So the parents are trying to suggest delaying using the potty, and the issue is really more now one of loss, because to poop or urinate, you don't have as good control as you do around your orality. You can close your mouth and not take food in. But with urination and defecation, you're not just taking in, you're letting go. And this is anxiety producing, especially if in the first year there has been a lot of anxiety about loss. So the idea of losing one's stool can be a very frightening thing. So it's, again, very important that parents are able to be tolerant, have realistic expectations of their child, that they can also be firm but not harsh. It's very different to be firm and consistent than to be angry and punitive. So the parent's ability, I think, to tolerate much more increased anxiety states that the child gets in that are sometimes confusing to a parent because the child either seems so independent before, they can't understand exactly why there's so much anxiety, and that there's now the power of fantasy, like the child can imagine things. And this can be a big help, and I'll talk about some of the aids in managing aggression. But I think there's also an ability to imagine frightening things. They don't have to just happen. A child can imagine that mother might leave. And so there's a way in which a lot is going on in the mind where a child can get frightened that the mother might disapprove of something. So all of these things can be brought to mind. And it does take a lot of tolerance, firmness, patience, empathy, and I think above all also a willingness and readiness to repair. like children really want to repair, and it's very important that the parent is receptive and doesn't hold a grudge against the child and has reasonable expectations. You know, sometimes parents think, well, they need to socialize their child. The child needs to share. You know, at this age when so much is going on, to take a child's toy away and say you have to share it with your friend, this is very unhelpful. A child needs protection. And, you know, being able to understand sort of what the child needs at different times, I think, is very important. For some children and some of their manifestations of the aggression at this age, some children feel much safer having a tantrum that sort of calls the parent in because the child's, you know, flailing about. I think at certain ages, a parent saying, go to your room, can be a very frightening thing. So a child may be afraid to put into words, I hate you. That sort of commits yourself to something that could be very frightening. So a tantrum may be a lot easier than putting the feelings into words. Sometimes what children do at this time, it's called darting away. They sort of run away from the parent to try to really master this separateness issue, sort of hoping the parent is going to chase them and pick them up and bring them back. But that doesn't always happen. I think sometimes if you run away and you're in the supermarket, you're not going to get a very loving response. So also, I should say, I'm making it sound like we expect parents to be so super responsive. I think what people seem to think, if a parent can be appropriately responsive 50% of the time, you're doing very well. We're not talking about like you have to be so super tuned in or else you're going to have these dire consequences. So, another defense that starts at this age and is a very problematic one is what's called splitting, where a child at this age really hasn't been able to fully, like I say, have the capacity, the synthetic function to sort of integrate a full picture of another person until a certain point, probably later in the second year toward the third year of life. And splitting sort of serves the purpose. It's where the child almost feels like there are two mothers. There's the good, loving mother, and there's the bad, angry, mean mother. And they sort of keep them separate on purpose, as if they let in some of the aggression to the loving mother, she's going to disappear. So the keeping it separate is really a way of preserving the relationship. But I think one of the things I'm going to stress is how much and how crucial in terms of the normal handling of aggression, the ability to integrate the positive and negative into one image, to be able to hold in mind, I don't like this that my mother does, but I remember she also tries to help me feel better, that there is a complicated picture of a full person. So when we talk about pathological aggression, we're really talking about a state where, and this does happen in some really extreme situations, where that kind of integration is not possible and aggression is totally cut off and not integrated or fused with positive emotion. So you can never do better for a child. I mean, being loving is like money in the bank. It's like to be drawn on when you have to live through some of these horrendous kinds of battles and tantrums. and being able to not be changed by the anger and integrate it is very, very key. What happens if there really are too many negative responses, and really predominantly negative, there is not an integration of the positive and the negative, and the mother is internalized. And I'm going to talk a bit about some of the aids to dealing with aggression. I'll highlight those. Really, internalization, the kinds of internal what gets taken in and becomes part of our inner world is a crucial piece of what helps modulate aggression. Play and fantasy is enormously helpful, and I'll try to give you some examples. And the beginning of a conscience, how a child starts to, and this is part of the identification, but how the child starts to take in sort of the prohibitions of the parent. And I think very key here is that when a parent is gentle, firm, and consistent in their limit setting, that a child has loving feelings toward the parent. They want to go along with what the parent wants. It's a very natural thing. It's called compassionate compliance. And it's really the very first step of conscience, where it's like the child wants to get with the parent's program. Their natural inclination is not to feel they want to fight against it. It's when too much is asked too soon in a harsh and a way that's really not tuned in. I don't mean that child's always going to go along. Certainly there's going to be a struggle. But I'm saying in sort of the beginning ways, and really even in the second year of life, the beginning of conflict, because the child wants to do what pleases himself, but really wants to do what pleases the parent. That, there's not like a conscience and morality, but what's good is what makes your mother and father happy, and what's bad is what makes them unhappy. So this system starts really quite early. Another great help in terms of helping to temper aggression is play. I mean, one of the things, it's really amazing to see this. You have a 15-month-old who's having a tantrum. If you take a doll and just copy what that child is doing in the tantrum, most children will be shocked. They'll look at it. It's like they recognize that that's me. And it's a way of helping them get a little distance to what they're doing. It's the most natural thing in the world in terms of mastery. A child who goes to the dentist, the next thing you know, he's got his teddy bear and he's poking into the mouth of the teddy bear. That the idea that you can distance something that's too hot, but you can deal with it by playing it out. And this is an enormous help. In one little boy who I was seeing, who is the most aggressive child, the one who felt himself to be a monster, he had this stuffed animal that I got able to use so that the onslaught of aggression didn't come directly at me. And this Charlie became sort of the character that represented him at times. And at times, I was him, and he was Charlie telling me how I should behave. So the idea that we could transfer that relationship from a direct doing battle to playing it out, distance from us, was a crucial piece in slowly allowing him to own his aggression, in fact, own his feelings. And this is something that you need to do gradually. But anyway, just to get back to the point of when this doesn't go well, and the parent, the best of circumstances is that the parent is internalized. This is what we call object constancy. That the soothing parent, the integrated image of the parent, becomes internal, so the child doesn't need literally the parent in the flesh to feel soothed. That they have a sense of the inner presence of the parent and the kind of soothing that the parent does so that they're able to be alone. Transitional object is a step in that direction where the object carries some of those soothing functions before it's really been internalized by the child. So the child might lie his head on the teddy bear in the way he used to lie his head on his mother, so he can be soothed by this object that's a little distant from the mother. But when it doesn't go well, if the mother has been much too negative and frightening, another way of trying to preserve the positive relationship with the mother is to take in the mother, or the mothering one, but it's not integrated into the child's inner world. It's sort of treated almost like a disassociated foreign body. And many of you that work with patients who have had very frightening parenting, sometimes you can almost hear the parent's voice when they're talking to you. It's like a part of them, but it hasn't really been integrated. So it's sort of a foreign body. And this presence sort of keeps the child from getting aggressive with the parent, but it can have a very powerful impact on the child's behavior. And one child that we followed up as part of the Mahler research project, this was a child who had been followed when she was her first 3 years of life. Then she was followed up when she was 4 and 5. Then she was followed up in latency, in adolescence, in young adulthood, and then she actually came into treatment with me when she was in her 50s. And we had these very careful observations of her in the nursery. And unfortunately, her mother was really a very frightening mother who was a kind of mix of being extremely aggressive with the child at times, hitting her, squeezing her, flicking her on the cheek, saying things like, I hope this hitting doesn't run away with me. At the same time, she would get vicarious gratification about this child being aggressive, and this was one of the most aggressive children in the nursery. So she would be kicking and hitting other kids, and the mother would rarely intervene, and at one point told her daughter, to tell this child she was sorry and give him a kiss, and then she said, and then you can use your feminine charms to get away with it. So the idea that was conveyed was really the mother got pleasure out of this daughter kicking and hitting, and usually by the time a child's 2 or 3, they're socialized enough to contain themselves. This child was hitting and biting and scratching well until she was about 5 or 6. And when she came to me as an adult, she had absolutely this idealized picture of her mother. She thought her mother was the best mother ever. These children also had gotten the adult detachment interview when they were in their 40s. And she was definitely an avoidantly attached child. And you could see that part of the attachment interview asks, here she's giving these glowing examples of how wonderful the mother is. Can you think of a time, give me a specific example of when your mother was loving? And she couldn't think of any specific example to support that. So unfortunately, and I can sort of tell you a lot more about how in different phases of development, the impact of this hostile introject, so that she became actually, for a certain period where she's so aggressive, by latency, she is really constricted and not able to use aggression. She has this hostile voice in her head criticizing her. And so she's sort of now very constricted and unable to really use assertiveness and aggression on her own behalf. And she sort of seeks out kids who are very bossy and dominating. So the impact of that introject is very powerful through different phases of development, but certainly its impact is very profound. So maybe I'll stop here, and I think I didn't really go into great detail about some of the different ways of handling aggression in different phases, so maybe we can talk a little more about that, but let's see what your questions are. Yeah, I do. I think it's, the question was, is there a difference of aggression in boys and in girls? I would say there's a difference in the way it's expressed. I wouldn't say that either boys or girls have more or less hostile aggression, but it is much more usual that boys act it out on the outside world and are more likely, in very extreme cases, to really do violence to other people or things, where girls are much more likely to turn the aggression inward and hurt themselves, or hurt themselves in different ways, but not so much acting it out directly on the world. Yeah. 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 Well, I would say, this is again part of a very important dialogue of the child with the caretaking ones. And unfortunately, if the parent is not comfortable with the child's pleasure in their body, enjoying their body, feeling comfortable with their body, this certainly is something that can get conveyed to a child. I would say as a child grows, this is really something that's the hallmark of adolescence, that hopefully, and sort of the idea that people are able to establish sort of a best friend where you start to be able to share your inner body sensations, your feelings about your body, and get comfortable with your body and your sexual feelings. This is a very crucial part of adolescence. I think you see the function of the peer group, the same-sex peer groups, where there's a lot of chance to sort of check things out with someone else and learn about their inner life, their fantasies, masturbation, whatever. And it's really not until later adolescence, I think, that that chance to really start experimenting with a romantic partner. So I think it's sort of a gradual, step-by-step way, but certainly the most basic learning is in the home. And, there are a variety of things that are important in terms of not overstimulation either, but certainly a feeling that a child feels safe enough to convert any of their actions into questions, and these are areas that can be talked about, that the parent welcomes, wants to hear the child's curiosities and questions and feelings. I think a crucial goal in all of how to handle aggression or sexuality is trying to, make a space where a child can feel safe to put into words what's going on and feel that they're going to get a welcoming, not a defensive kind of answer, and be able to feel free, whatever they're worried about or whatever they have questions about.
I have two questions.
Sure.
One is a follow-up.
Yes.
Ian's question, which is, why do we understand
Yeah.
boys turn aggression out
Yeah.
and girls turn it in?
Yeah.
Because you seem to be speaking of almost a primary masochism in girls.
Mhm.
Talking about turning aggression in.
Yeah.
Why is this? Do you have any take on that?
Yeah. Well, I actually sort of looked at this in very, very young children. And one of the things that seemed to me, and you could see it as early as, the first and second year of life, that part of this separation process that I was talking about, I think part of it is sort of boys come into the world, in a sense, having a little bit different maturational timetable than girls. Girls tend to be a little more ahead in certain awarenesses of the social world, of the reactivity of the parents. And I think boys also have a kind of, maybe partly because of hormones, sort of an outward thrusting way in the world. And so they're drawn by exploring and action and doing, whereas girls tend to be more into the social world and and very affected by the cues they get from the mother, let's say, that you shouldn't be aggressive, or the mother frowns and the little girl's very ready to stop doing that aggressive thing, whereas a boy just punches right through it and, seems less concerned until a later point. So I think there's different maturational timetables, I think different constitutional elements, maybe a way in which there's more leeway for boys to act in an outwardly aggressive way in different cultures. I think it's not just the parents, it's the culture that you grow up in, that sort of you get trained in pretty early, the do's and don'ts. So I think there are probably a lot of different factors. Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I didn't get a chance to really talk about, sort of the much more extreme cases. But I think, there's kind of and I would think about it this way, that all the things we're talking about, the kind of sensitive responsiveness, in certain, homes, unfortunately, an alcoholic parent, a violent parent, a child's crying, and a parent's reaction is to get enraged. So if some of these early steps aren't taken, a child's not going to develop the capacity to delay. In fact, what happens is they get into these overwhelmed states, and there's no sense, here's a protective presence to make it better. So what happens often is that kind of aggressive stand, almost taking on the explosiveness, is a protective stand. They are so vulnerable inside and have none of these developed capacities to process things, to think about things, to empathize. There's no empathy. So that vulnerable core, the only way to protect it is to have a kind of omnipotent, violent stance. And, to try to help treat some child who's grown up in a violent or overwhelmingly traumatic home, they want to stay as far away from their feelings as possible because they're terrified. This takes so long to help, build a kind of safe environment. But I would say, think about, without that kind of presence, vulnerability, anxiety, you have no one to turn to. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And I would say, one of the things about latency that is so crucial in channeling aggression is learning. Like, school is a great help because you're up against an obstacle. You don't know something. You have to master it. It channels aggression in a fabulous way. So kids with learning difficulties, this is a real problem with aggression because they're up against an obstacle and they can't overcome it easily. So I think this is a very key issue that, really so important to address where there are problems with learning. Another issue in latency, you have really hopefully from earlier development, a sense of fair play and ability to be empathic. Kids love playing games and having the rules. So team sports, hobbies, building skills, these are great outlets for channeling aggression because you can be safely aggressive and competitive within the rules of the game. If you're not going to play by the rules, though, all bets are off. Then it's, sort of mayhem. But I think that's what's so wonderful about some of those capacities in latency because, when you have those basic capacities, I think having a model not of, sort of forceful authority, you listen to me because I'm your parent. That's so unhelpful. That is only going to add aggression. There's no way that can be helpful. But really trying to explain why there are rules, trying to help a child understand what the consequences are, that the consequences are very clear and immediate. A child's not told you're going to wait until, the weekend and then X, Y, and Z is going to happen. That you give a lot of warnings, so you help a child know there is going to be, it's not done angrily, calmly, matter of fact. These are the rules, these are why they have them. If a child thinks they're not right, you want to hear him out. It's not like, I mean, you certainly need to have rules, and firmness is very protective. A child whose parent is always giving in is a very miserable child. You know, having all that power, feeling like a tyrant, is not a safe place to be. But I think treating a child respectfully just because they're a child doesn't mean they might have very good reasons why they think something's fair or not fair. That being able to listen, and if the child has a point that you feel, you can be flexible, but to have a really clear, consistent way of having consequences, like losing a privilege, never physical hitting, anything like that, just stimulates aggression. And the idea that the stricter you are, then they're going to contain themselves better, it just makes no sense at all. It just builds up more aggression. It may not come out directly toward that parent, but that's probably going to be the bully at school. So I think in latency, a key, really important thing is what I think has been recognized more and more, how crucial that school environment is, that there is a no tolerance for bullying, that there is not that kind of, environment in the school of the punishment and heaping on more punishments. If a child is acting aggressively, you want to understand why. You don't want to just mindlessly, and then you're going to do this and that. It just is so unhelpful. So I think, having an environment where there is a respect and an understanding doesn't mean you're giving in or it's a free-for-all at all. That is very unsafe. But I think, having that kind of a model of talking things over, hearing the other person's point of view, problem solving. Sure. Yeah. Uh-huh. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I think I was trying to, and certainly aggression can be expressed in a variety of ways. It can be expressed with behavior, it can be in your thoughts, in your fantasies. But I think what I was trying to say by trying to talk about this continuum, and it doesn't need to be whether it's behavior or thoughts, feelings, that very important there are these different ways of expressing and feeling it. That to assert yourself is a certain kind of aggression, but it does not have an intent to hurt. It has an intent to stand up for yourself, to master things, to explore things. But you are using this forceful, I forget the exact way that it was quoted because it was from Webster's dictionary, sort of a forceful putting yourself onto the environment. But that's very different than an intent to destroy someone or to harm someone. So that's why I say the continuum is important. I would call the intent to harm hostile, destructive, or aggression, whereas the other is assertiveness. I might not even necessarily label it aggression, but I think if we can have in mind that aggression is positive and that we need it, we don't want to be like those babies that are apathetic. It's a force in life that we need. Yeah. Mhm. That is, Right. No, you always have to understand the underlying intentions and what's going on. You can't read it off just from the behavior. I mean, a child who is autistic and terrified and flailing out, that's, a very different thing than a child who wants to make someone squirm and intimidate them. So, key is understanding, if it is with behavior, what is driving the behavior. That's why I say if a child in school is being very aggressive, your first question isn't, I'm going to punish it, it's what is going on here.
I just want to know whether other people are also curious, but I want to shift it a little to the crew,
Yeah.
and not just the child.
Yeah.
And ask you jokingly said that as parents, if we can be firm and understanding, 50% of the time.
Yes,
we're
that's
doing
good.
well. But there's often a lot of guilt and pain and confusion about the other 50%.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're not so good at it.
Yeah. Well, I would say,
And
yes.
it doesn't go so well.
Right.
You get locked in
Yeah.
with 5-year-old,
Yeah.
12-year-old. And at that point, how do you,
Yeah.
from the parent's
Well,
perspective,
right.
and
Yeah.
their feeling, how do you
Yeah. Well, I would say a key thing, of course, is trying to understand what has gone on, why you've lost it with your child. But the most important thing is really that you can apologize. I mean, if you feel what you've done, wasn't the way you wanted to handle it, I think a child is very forgiving, if you've been forgiving of them. So I would say anything you do, if you're willing to own and take responsibility, that time I really got too angry, and, own up to it, to act like, and if you do that again, like it's the child's doing, and you can't own, I don't care what that child did, you don't feel good that you got that angry or you deprived, whatever it is you did. So I don't think there's ever anything that you can't repair. I think the point is it's crucial to repair. And that, we're all human. And I think the more you convey that to your child, so you're not expecting that child to be so perfect, that's fine. Yeah. I mean, competitiveness can be very healthy. And if it's channeled, in ways where, it doesn't get into wanting to hurt your rival and really doing something destructive, if, and I think conscience and the nature of someone's conscience and what the standards are that someone is measuring themselves by is a very crucial piece of this. So you want to try to help a child set reasonable, realistic standards. And it may be where a parent has sort of conveyed, I mean, there can be so many different reasons why someone might get overly competitive. But sometimes if a child feels they need to fulfill some wish of the parents for the child to go to an Ivy League school, to accomplish this or that, and there's a demand for a kind of perfection, it's not a comfortable thing. It feels more like life and death, and something is very off. So that's why I was trying to tell some of the aids of channeling aggression have to do with identifications, one's conscience, one's standards, how to help that or guilt can be very helpful. You know, that, a child doesn't, develop guilt right away, but that can be a very big help in not wanting to hurt someone. Yeah.
Many children who are very, very
Yeah.
bright and also
Yeah.
have consistent issues with rage and acting out.
Yeah.
And then kind of
Yeah.
aging
Yeah.
afterwards. So
Yeah.
troubling.
Well, I think we're talking now more of that vulnerable core, that when shame is so big like that, you're talking about someone, who probably hasn't had some of those, developmental steps that really have allowed him to feel more safe with being vulnerable. So I think part of the work is probably, it's not always uncovering. Sometimes it's really trying to help build in some capacities to, feel safer, that you work with this person and you become someone who can help them feel that they can turn to you for help. And, that often is part of having them feel less panicked about being, feeling they can't do something well, so that that reactivity to the aggression isn't so ready to happen. But, that's a lot of work it takes to build. Eileen.
This actually builds on a question, which is working with an adult
Yes.
who has a voice in her head. I'm constantly,
Yes.
this woman is late by 4 minutes.
Yes.
She's just trembling
Yes.
and expecting the worst. We're going
Yeah.
to do a phone session because she can't get in. She spends 2
Yeah.
hours thinking about calling me
Yeah.
for morning.
Yeah.
And the history is just really, I can't find anything good about her mother at all. Her mother is now dying, which is probably the best thing her mother has done. Her mother's in her 90s. And the father had some generosity to him, but it made the mother jealous. Anything the father gave was fatherly. So in trying to find some loving aspects to pull in, there's almost nothing from
Mhm.
either parent. So it's a kind of construction. I
Mhm.
guess how you deal with an adult who, if she's full of denial, the idea she had a good mother, but she can't stand it as it becomes clearer.
Well, but that is part of the work, helping her understand that all this criticism, in a way, was really not meant for herself, that given the disappointment in the mother, she was very angry at her mother. But it's going to take a long time, and you're going to be very important in helping her, really feel there can be some good in the world. Yeah.
So absolutely, I wanted to add some of it. But going back to the good I was wondering about that, which is something that's kind of fun. So, say we actually played on tell school and it was very where and it was looked down as like an object in the class. Or we're playing chess and I feel like educators and other people discourage that.
Yeah.
Not nice and the other kids are actually girls, there's like nice story about
Yeah.
nice soft story.
Yeah.
And I was torn about that.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I would say it's really important that a child doesn't feel like aggression is bad, that there are always reasons why someone might be feeling aggressive, and you're not going to be going and hitting someone because you feel angry. But you really want to convey curiosity. What's happening? Why is she crushing him? I mean, I would want to know more about it and feel very happy that he's able to play it out. That's, great, and you want to learn more about it. But I think probably what would be the, sort of most negative thing to be doing to a child is for them to feel that anger's bad or wrong or you shouldn't be angry. It's just life. I mean, we're all wired that way. There's no way around it. Yeah. 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 Well, that's so complicated because those kids with the shooting, those we're talking about really pathological aggression. But boys, they're going to play with guns whether you give them a gun or a stick that they make into a gun. It's playful, and that's not what's going to get a child into trouble. I think it's much more some of the things we're talking about when you have a parent who, when a child shows need or cry, gets enraged, and there's no real tempering and understanding. But I think play is a great thing, and certainly I don't believe kids should play with real guns, but toys are fine. I mean, that's not what stimulates aggression. It's a nice outlet for aggression.
I don't want to comment here about the building, but I'm very, very different schools and camp.
The what?
So I think that you were going to talk about what should we do about aggression. And that's my.
No, I was really just saying not to convey that aggression is bad. Certainly to convey there are helpful ways, adaptive ways that you can express your anger. You need to understand what you're angry about, and I'll help you, with what it is that made you angry and help you find helpful ways of getting what you want. A child yelling? Well, I would certainly welcome yelling over hitting. So I think it depends on their age, I think when you're angry and you yell, it's a good outlet. It's certainly not hands. I wouldn't feel that so bad. Well, like I said, I think you can see it really early on. If there is no, integration of loving feelings, like this patient where you can't find it, that is very serious. Well, you'll be privy to it in your patient. If your patient shows, no integration, no conscience, no empathy, you're in serious straits with that. I mean, you're talking about serious pathology. Well, I think, like I was saying, even at the end of the first year of life, you start to see these patterns of attachment where there's really no organized way of coping, a kind of fragmentation and disorganization. I would be very concerned about that.
I don't want to cut it off, but thank you for your questions.
Sure.
You could probably ask your questions.
Thank you.